our next run, we've seen a lot of great games on the event schedule. We've seen a lot of classic games, but there is only one truly award-winning game that is going to be our next game, our next run here, which is Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood All Dungeons by LordFluffy. And I've been excited to see this all week long. This is my favorite expansion of the bunch, which might be a bit of a hot take, but I like it a lot. So whenever you are ready, LordFluffy, go ahead and take it away.
Why, hello there, everyone. My name is LordFluffy, and welcome to the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV, with an expanded free trial that includes all the Realm Reborn and the award-winning Stormblood and Heavensward expansions, with no restrictions on playtime. Alrighty, so before we get into the run here, we're going to be doing a couple little things to set up. First and foremost, this run is completing every single dungeon that was released during the Stormblood expansion. Doing this, we're going to go to the Duty Finder settings and activate the unrestricted party option. This will allow us to enter these dungeons at maximum level with all the items, gear, and other effects that we would otherwise have at max level, rather than going in at the synced level 60 to 70 numbers. So, before we head in, I'm going to pop a couple pieces of food to give myself a bit of extra stats throughout a long duration. And timing will begin when the barrier inside of the first dungeon has dropped. So, I will let you know when we are starting. We're going to load in here and get ourselves ongoing. Timing will start in about 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so we're going to be doing the entirety of this run on the melee DPS job Ninja. And the reason why Ninja is so good for this is one simple reason: movement. Ninja is by far and away the most mobile job in Final Fantasy XIV, with multiple dash abilities, ways to reset the cooldown and store charges of those dash abilities, and a passive run speed buff that makes it ever so slightly faster than the other jobs. And those time saves build up over time. Ninja also has some of the highest burst damage in the game, which assists with the more staggered combat of Final Fantasy XIV's dungeon design. Putting these two things together, you'll be able to go at speeds no other job can really go at when playing through these dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV. And the fact that we're going in at max level means we're well beyond the expected levels that we're meant to go in with a party of 4 players, meaning that basically everything in this dungeon is soloable without any real hassle whatsoever. So you're already seeing, that's actually a mistake, input there, whoopsie daisies. So you're already seeing basically how this works. So the main dash ability that we'll be using the majority of the time is the ability Shikuchi. Shikuchi is a ground-targeted dash that goes 20 yalms. Basically, think of that as meters. And making use of that, we can go a lot of distance in a single button press. Basically, think that every single Shikuchi that I end up using will save 2 seconds worth of movement minimum. It can save more or less depending on when you use it, but generally speaking, work at it around the 2-second mark. We also have an additional dash ability that I'll be using here in a second, known as Forked Raiju. Whenever you use a Moodrill ability by the name of Raiton, you gain access to a stack of Raiju Ready. Raiju Ready lets you use one of 2 abilities, one of which is Forked Raiju. Forked Raiju is a targeted gap closer that I need an enemy in order to be able to target with. So, the majority of my movement is going to be done with Shikuchi, but some of it will be done with Forked Raiju as well. But we won't be seeing Forked Raiju as much. Small little trick here: if you activate your Doton AoE ground target ability and then use the dash, I was a little bit late with it that time, so we'll just work with it. But if you use the ground targeted dash Shikuchi while you use the ability Doton and it's coming down, you can actually move the effect of Doton from where you put it down to where your Shikuchi ends, which is a great little way to gain a little bit of extra damage in certain situations. All right, apologies on the breaking commentary there. So, the other factor that I mentioned is the high burst damage that Ninja brings to the table. Ninja is one of the highest burst damage jobs in the game, having the single highest damaging ability in the entire game in the form of Hyosho Ranryu. Hyosho Ranryu is an ability that deals 1300 potency on its own, but is guaranteed to have that damage increased by 30%, being only accessible under the effect of Kasatsu, which is an ability that lets me use a free Muja charge and also increases the damage of that Muja by 30%. So, you know, 1300 potency at a guaranteed, 30% to that. It's a lot of damage. So the way that this particular speedrun ends up working out, whoops daisies, did not mean to turn around there. Can we stop that? Thank you. All right. So there's one extra ability that I haven't mentioned yet, which is the all-class ability Sprint. Sprint increases your movement speed by 30% whenever you end up using it. There is one caveat to it, though, in that 30% movement speed has a 20-second duration out of combat, but a 10-second duration in combat. So anytime we use Sprint in a dungeon, we typically want to be using it when we are not in combat, lest we only end up getting the half-second duration. This won't always apply, unfortunately, and this is sometimes because it's impossible to get the full duration depending on how progressing through the dungeon is, but other times that it's simply more optimal to eat the shorter duration so that we can get more usages overall in the dungeon. So that's the first dungeon down here. That is the Siren Song C, all done and dusted. Next up is going to be Shisui of the Violent Tides. A Violet Tide, not violent. I always say violent because I'm adding an N there that isn't actually there. So at the start of every dungeon, you'll see me use my Mudra abilities to activate one particular Mudra by the name of Huton. Huton is an effect of the Mudras that you can get that actually lowers the cooldown of your global cooldown, which basically means that I can attack more and therefore push out more overall damage. That'll be integral for this particular run, as enemies will usually take more than one hit to actually end up going down. In other speedruns where you use Ninja, Huton isn't quite as important because enemies are dying in 1, maybe 2 hits total. But since everything in Stormblood and onward usually ends up living for more than 1 hit, that extra attack speed comes in incredible handy throughout progression through all dungeons Stormblood. Right now, there is a particular wave of enemies that I'm going to try and be pulling into this Doton. Doton is one of the Mudra abilities that I use that puts a ground-targeted, a ground AoE that does damage over time to any enemies inside of it. Also has an additional effect that can be triggered by certain abilities called... What is it actually called? I'm actually forgetting what it's called right now. Goka Mekyaku? No, that's not it. Well, either way, we'll figure it out another time. This boss here, I want to try and kill it before this attack goes off here. Didn't quite get there, needed a little bit better RNG, but we'll just make it go down in a single extra GCD, which is no big deal in the grand scheme. Now, I have to be a little bit careful through this section here. A lot of Final Fantasy XIV will use area triggers to make certain effects happen in a dungeon. It is actually possible, however, via the use of Shikushi to completely bypass these area triggers and cause me to have to backtrack to actually hit them for progression. There's a few places in the run where that can happen, and through that first hallway there was area triggers that I had to make sure I was hitting. It's very rare that this ends up happening, and usually it has to involve perfect placement of the Shikuchi, but I've had it happen more than once, so it's better to be safe than sorry in this particular situation. Something you'll be seeing me take advantage of throughout the course of this run is an ability called True North. So since I'm a melee DPS, melee DPS have these additional things called positionals, where certain attacks will deal more damage or have additional effects based on which position on the boss you are hitting. However, there is no positionals for the front of the boss. So, since the boss will always be facing me as I'm the only unit in the instance, I want to make use of True North to always get these positional bonuses, considering I can't normally get them otherwise. All of this is stuff that is going to come down to optimizing my damage in the grand scheme of things. And damage optimization is fairly important for the All Dungeon Stormblood run. You're going to see me managing my cooldowns and also doing attacks and other stuff in specific ways to try and maximize the amount of damage I'm dealing in any given instant. Something I'll also be doing, as you're seeing right now, is making use of an ability called Hide. Hide will make me completely invisible to enemies in certain situations, not in dungeons, but in certain situations, but also has the additional effect of resetting my mudras, which are super important for not only my movement, but my damage-dealing capabilities. As an aside before I continue, certain bosses will have HP thresholds in which you want to take care of the boss in question. So this boss, I want to get down to about 90% and then use Shosho Ranryu on it. What that does is it bypasses the boss's HP threshold in order to go into an invulnerability phase, allowing me to go into an add phase instead, and as a result, I end up taking out the boss before it does an invulnerability phase, guaranteeing that I save time on that boss. Alright, next up, we're going to be having Bardam's Medal. Bardam's Medal is going to be a lot of me using my AoE Mudra ability, Katon, to deal some AoE damage while also resetting the cooldown of my Shikuchi as I progress forward. The main reason is because at this point, AoE optimization becomes more and more important every step I take along the path to the first boss. And that's the general way that dungeon progression works out in Final Fantasy XIV from Stormblood and onward, in the sense that you have to effectively... Why'd I get stunned? Oh, I'm paralyzed. I accidentally took an AoE. Oopsie daisies. Dungeon progression in Final Fantasy XIV, generally speaking, by the Stormblood point, is mostly just making sure that every enemy that you can kill is dead before the game will let you progress to the next part of the dungeon. There's a few cases where this is not the case throughout 14, as only certain enemies will need to be killed, or you have to take out an enemy that drops a key and then use the key to progress to the next point. But most of that is in earlier expansions and not Stormblood. I'm going to make a quick use of Horizon there to get me Huton. Horizon is an ability that was added this expansion to Ninja to give it a way to get the Huton effect, which makes my GCD shorter, thus letting me attack faster, without using the Huton Mudra ability. Effectively, it's a way to not use up a Mudra if you end up dropping your Huton. But ideally, you wouldn't have to use that ever. In that situation, I had forgotten to refresh my Huton. So the faster way to do it there, rather than use a Mudra for my ability, is to use the low damage of that effect, but the ability to get the attack faster going forward. So this section right here, I'm going to make use of any and all cooldowns I still have remaining, and that's because the next boss is not a boss at all that I can damage. It is a complete auto-scroller boss that I only need to successfully perform the mechanics of the fight in order to be able to properly progress through it. So, as I enter the fight, I am now on a complete timer. In no way, shape, or form can I speed this up. So, this is a fantastic time for the host to take away for some messages.
Thanks so much. So I really was just watching there for a while. I need to play some Ninja. Is what I need to do. This has been a lot of fun. We are raising money for Point of Pride. Point of Pride is a trans-led 501c3 nonprofit organization. They've served tens of thousands of people in all 50 states and 100 plus countries by providing access to gender-affirming health and wellness services. The money that we raise this weekend will go to Point of Pride's various support programs, such as their Electrolysis Support Fund, which is a scholarship-like program that provides direct financial assistance to trans people in need. To trans people in need of permanent hair removal services that they cannot otherwise afford. If you'd like to apply for one of Point of Pride's grants or garment programs, or if you'd like to get involved as a donor or a volunteer, you can go to pointofpride.org to learn more. If you'd like to donate, you can use the donate command in chat, and please make sure you check through all of the incentives. You can use the incentives command in chat to learn more about those. As you're going through the donation process in Tiltify, you can donate as little as $1 or as much as you would like to, of course. But you can apply those donations to both polls as well as the target incentives. So you can put them to two different things at once, get two different incentives or one donation. So please make sure you're making the most out of all of your donations. Right now we've got two polls running. We've got 3 polls running. Looks like one of which is for the file name for our Links Between Worlds randomizer speedrun later. We've got a character choice bid war for Chameleon Twist, and a bonus flags poll for Sticky Business. And the next target that needs to be met is we are exactly $666 into a $1,000 incentive for a Link to the Past 80% bonus run. And if we were to meet that, that would get us over $4,000. So if you'd like to donate to a specific incentive, that's a good one to donate towards. And again, you get all the information with the donate charity or the incentives command in chat.
Alrighty. So while we're waiting for this boss to end here, I'm going to show off a funny little thing. Wait, I can't actually do that. Whoopsie daisies. I forgot you can't do any actions during this. So I'll just explain it. Mudras, the way that Mudras works is that you input a Mudra and it gives you an ability. If you input another Mudra that isn't the same Mudra, you'll get another ability, and then you can do that up to 3 times to get a variation of Mudra abilities that you can use. If you were to, for example, misinput your Mudra and do the same Mudra twice, or if you input the Mudra you want, then do any other ability, that Mudra will now turn into a bunny, which, if you look on my head, bunny. You don't ever want to do this. It is cute and adorable and everything. However, it does also end up completely wasting your Mudra and losing you time, so it is avoid like the plague levels of mistake to make there. Alright, so this section here, I'm going to be trying to do an avoidance strategy here if I'm quick enough on the draw. Nah, not quite. If I was quick enough on the draw, I could sneak around that second boulder there and avoid a small knockback effect. Didn't end up happening this time, so we will just continue forward. Drag all these enemies together. We're going to use Kisatsu to use Goka Mekyaku right now. Trigger a Hollow Nozuchi, which is the additional effect of Doton I mentioned earlier. Take out everything that's there in question. Set down another Doton for these guys, and now we'll be heading into the next boss. And the reason why I'm using all these extra cooldowns, when normally I would save it for the boss, is because this boss also has an HP threshold that I want to avoid. However, it's very late into the boss's overall health pool. So as a result, I want to get it low, but I want to get it low, but I don't want to get it too low too quickly. So I'm doing specific numbers here so that I can get it to about 20% before it casts Wings Unbound. I didn't quite get it. I was needed to be a little bit quicker there. If I was just a little bit quicker, what would have happened is I would have killed it before it went into this ad phase here, guaranteeing that the boss would die and skipping the ad phase entirely. But I have to do an extra 2 GCDs plus wait out the time of the spawn into the ad phase in question for me to finish it off. And that is the 3rd dungeon done. Now, something to note as I load into the 4th dungeon is that certain times you get the ability to ignore certain enemies and just go and kill the boss in question. The game Final Fantasy XIV considers any and all dungeons complete when and only when the final boss is done. This does mean that if you can avoid killing certain enemies, you could drag them into the final boss room, kill the final boss, and then completely ignore them. So that is something I'm going to be trying to do a little bit later on in this dungeon. There'll be a specific enemy that I don't have to kill for progression that I'll be attempting to completely avoid if the opportunity arises. For now, I'm going to be making use of both Fork Raiju and Shikuchi to dash through this dungeon and try and drag all these enemies together. While I'm moving, I'm going to be trying to make use of Throwing Daggers, which is a small damaging ability that is the only way I can damage people at a range at all times that isn't tied to a cooldown like Mudras. Now, that leads me into talking about damage optimization. So, for every single GCD that I every single extra GCD that I take to take out a specific enemy, that is up to 2.5 seconds of extra time it takes me to progress through the dungeon. And every single GCD you save, saves 2.5 seconds. Every single GCD you lose, loses up to 2.5 seconds. So optimizing your damage as best you can to save as many GCDs as you can actually becomes paramount for optimization throughout this dungeon. Throughout all the dungeons of this, I should say. Now, you might not think that 2.5 seconds is a whole lot, but just like the small movement speed buff that Ninja gets overall, that adds up over time. Every single GCD matters in the course of an entire dungeon run. And over the course of several dungeons, it adds up or subtracts slowly but surely the entire way through. So for this section, there's absolutely nothing stopping me from progressing all the way to the final mob. So that is what I'm going to be doing here. I'm only using my abilities right now to gain movement capabilities to get up to this final mob right here. At which point, I will put down a Doton, then once again use Kisatsu into Goka Mekyaku and hopefully take out all the enemies here in question. I ended up missing the Doman Reaper here, so I'm going to take him out. But once the Reaper is down, the doorway to the boss is open. Now, the one issue here is I don't get full duration sprint by doing this, and I don't get access to hide in order to be able to reset my mudras. However, not having to stop and take out that enemy ends up saving a little bit more time to get over to this boss in question. And the reason it ends up saving time is if the enemy approaches the boss, I can actually hit it with certain cleave abilities that'll cause him to die outright while I'm damaging the main boss in question. So it didn't end up happening this time because he used a few too many ranged abilities that kept him away from the boss. So, again, we're going to be continuing onward. These enemies will auto-aggro to us as we move forward, so I don't need to pay attention to them. And I can run up to the next set of mobs right now. The next set of mods spawns up here, and we're going to drag them all over to the door. The reason we're going to drag it over to the door is because as we kill all the sets of mobs here, another ad will spawn behind the door that I want to drag into the remaining duration of the Doton. A little bit of missed AoEs there causes one guy to live a little bit extra. So now you can see this one extra ad spawns, and we can hit both of the enemies with the Doton ability here right now from both sides. And the one enemy that we've been ignoring this entire time, we can now properly take care of as a result. Ooh, I forgot to refresh my Mudra. That's a silly mistake. Alright, so this enemy has more HP than your average enemy, and as a result, it has an additional factor to it, where additional ads will spawn at certain HP thresholds. Ideally, you end up taking out the other enemy in question before anything can really cause a lot of damage to you. Didn't end up working out there that time, but that is okay, for we shall continue forward and take out Mr. Rip and Tear himself. Unfortunately, my language is in Japanese for saving time in the All Dungeons A Realm Reborn run, so unfortunately no yelling Rip and Tear for us this time. Alright. That dungeon is done and dusted. Next up is Castrum Abania. And this is another situation where the dungeon is one big long hallway that I have to get through. So movement optimization becomes more important than AoE optimization as a result. So we're going to start off, put up our Huton. And now we're going to simply just move forward with our movement abilities to get to the next set of mobs. By the time we get there, the Mudra's cooldown will have reset, allowing us to put down a Doton and thus engage in some rather good AoE damage optimization. So, we dash on over this guy. Now we use the Doton to activate the damage. Once all the enemies have entered the Doton's radius, we'll enter some AoE optimization again. Having a little bit of issue activating Mudras at the correct time here, mostly due to a little bit of weird targeting and enemies dying before I'm ready for them to. So a little bit of an unoptimal optimization there, but no big deal as we move forward. A couple enemies right here only have a little bit of health, so we're just going to quickly take them out as the next wave of enemies spawn. Next up was going to make sure that this Doton stands on top of the Signifier here. The Signifier has ranged attacks, which is different from every other enemy for the most part. Most trash mob enemies in Dungeon Design in 14 do melee attacks, which means they'll want to come up close to you. But anytime there is an enemy that can attack from near a range, you more or less want to pull every other mob to that enemy, rather than, you know, dealing with all the enemies around you and then going and taking care of that mob. Alright, first boss is down and dusted. So something I can go over a little bit quickly is sometimes there are additional little objectives that you have to take out in order to progress forward. Right here in normal gameplay, there would be no way that you could take out those Magitech pods before the ads inside of them spawn. However, because we have, you know, all the max level abilities and items and whatnot, it's easily possible to take out the mobs in question. So as a result, we can actually completely bypass the normal need to have ads spawn in order to progress through there. Other times, there'll be certain cases like right here where these second set of adds only spawn after the first ones are completely dead or one enemy is remaining. So it's actually okay in that situation if one enemy ends up living through a GCD, because we'll still have to get the adds to spawn anyway. Same thing here. When one of these pods or adds from the pods remaining, these adds spawn right over here. Now, AoE optimization for Ninja is a little bit weird, in the sense that normally AoE damage on Ninja, just in its regular melee range abilities, is only a DPS gain on 3 targets or higher. However, there is a few exceptions to that rule, in the sense that its AoE ability Katon is a gain on 2 over using Raiton as an AoE as a Mudra ability. And if there is a Doton on the ground, the Doton's additional effect of Hollow no Zuchi will actually make the AoE better on 2 targets versus 3. And then comes a little bit of a silly case of Goka Mekyaku versus Hyosho Ranryu, which is 2 additional abilities you get under the effect of Kasatsu. Because of how much damage Hyosho Ranryu deals, Goka Mekyaku is actually only a gain on 3 targets versus Katon's 2 targets. And there's a lot of very silly optimization things like that that you have to take into account anytime you are dealing damage to try and maximize your time save by not using more GCDs than you absolutely need to. So just as an additional example in this particular case, because there's so many enemies, even if I wasn't using the ground target of the Doton, it would still be optimal for me to use my AoE abilities simply because of how much more overall damage it would be dealing. Now, Hollow no Zuchi, as I mentioned, the additional effect that Doton can trigger additional damage whenever you use certain abilities is triggered by 4 abilities. It's triggered by Katon, Goka Mekyaku, Hake Mujinsatsu, as well as Phantom Kamaitachi. Phantom Kamaitachi is an additional ability you get when you activate the ability Bunshin. Bunshin requires 50 of this little scroll gauge that you can see on the right side, which is your Ninki gauge, and you build up Ninki by using GCD abilities that are not related to your mudras. Phantom Kamaitachi is an ability that deals very good single target burst, but also has good AoE burst. So sometimes we'll end up saving it for the bosses like I am right here, but also sometimes we'll use Phantom Kamaitachi for AoE DPS as well. There's a lot of optimization that comes from every single facet of Ninja's DPS that you have to generally consider when you're going through each dungeon, and it can get very overwhelming for sure, but that's why I particularly think Ninja is a lot of fun, because there's just so much that you have to remember across the board. Alright, so this is Alamigo. I will say minor story spoilers if you are, playing 14 right now and have not gotten to the final part of the Stormblood expansion. There will be minor story spoilers at the end of this, just a heads up on that front. I checked over chat for a second, and people are like, oh man, I can barely remember the names in English. Yeah, I understand that. I had to actually sit down and remember the names of these abilities, because back in Heavensward when I was playing, I was asked, like, how do you do a machinist rotation? I was like, and it was then I realized I didn't know the names of any of my abilities. So, especially when I'm trying to do marathon commentary and explaining things, remembering the names of your abilities kind of is a little bit important. Alright, anyway, so we make sure to deal some damage to these guys, and then we're going to drag the other mobs over here. We're going to use the ability Tenchi-Jin here, which allows us to do 3 Mudras back-to-back to drop an additional Doton and set up for a burst here with Phantom Kamaitachi. And then, if any enemies survive, we'll use Huton to take them out with an additional burst of Hollow no Zuchi. Alright, and when that's done, welcome to a Final Fantasy VII reference of this boss right over here, which is the first boss of Final Fantasy VII. This is the Magitech Scorpion. There is absolutely nothing special about this guy whatsoever that we have to care about. This is just a burn him down situation. But something to note is the fact that this is the first level 70 dungeon we get into. From this point onward, The damage scaling, the progression of bosses and trash mobs HP starts going a little bit slower than what we would normally be getting throughout the dungeon, because the dungeon levels that you're expected to be at during the first few dungeons of Stormblood is like 61, then 63, 65, etc. But from every dungeon at this point onward, the expected level you're expected to be at is level 70, and what's going to make you stronger is your item score level. So from this point, enemies will start getting stronger, but not in the same extreme level of stronger that they were getting during the leveling dungeons getting to right now. With that being said, sorry, go ahead.
Can I sneak in before the next boss?
Yeah, go right ahead.
We have a $250 donation from Grace Horizon, who says, "Hooray for the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV with an expanded free trial, which you can play through the entirety of A Realm Reborn, and the award-winning Heavensward expansion, and also the award-winning Stormblood expansion that we are seeing get melted very quickly right now." And that donation went to the file name Lonk for A Link Between Worlds randomizer. So if you'd like to unseat Lonk, which is now very firmly in the lead, please make sure to use the donate instance command in chat. Get your donations in for that bid war.
All right, am I going to take it back?
Absolutely.
Alrighty. So, something I haven't mentioned right here about DPS optimization is that there is an RNG element to it. So, there is a normal amount of damage variance that exists in the game where your abilities won't deal the same damage every single time that you use them. However, the normal variance of it is absolutely nothing compared to the variance of critical hits and direct hits. So, critical hits are your standard the damage ends up being extra whenever you get a critical hit. This is directly tied to the substat critical hit that you get from gear. And every little bit of extra critical hit stat that you have increases not only the damage of that critical hit, but also your chance to get the critical hit in question. So critical hit is maybe to some people's opinion, a little bit of a detriment and way too valuable of a stat because of just simply how much value you get out of it. But it's basically, to put it bluntly, it's the single most important substat in Final Fantasy XIV. So more or less, you're going to be seeing a lot of gear optimization based around how much critical hit value you have on that. We'll get back into discussing damage variance in a second as we talk about our good friend here, Xenos Ye Galvas. Hello, Xenos. I'm here to say that everyone is extremely happy to see you for some reason. I know the reason, but listen, Xenos, all right? Maybe don't be pretty. Maybe if you were a little less pretty. I don't know, man. You're just too pretty. You're distracting me. I'm trying to fight you here, and I can't land the finishing blow because you're just too pretty, man. Like I can't land the finishing blow. You're at no HP, and Okay, so the point here is that there is nothing I can do to kill Xenos. Xenos absolutely has to go through his ad phase in order for me to progress through this fight. And unfortunately, in order to get through this fight as fast as possible, I need the absolute best damage variance on my... the absolute best damage variance on a single one of my abilities, which is Kyosho Ranryu, to happen immediately. Otherwise, Xenos will get locked into a few abilities that he has to finish before he can enter the ad phase, do this little ultimate attack of his, and then after this, he will lose the immortality status and allow me to actually take him out. So, as you can see, he has to wait a little bit longer, and this GCD will then end up being able to take him out. Al Amigo is done, and we can move on to the next dungeon. So, I didn't end up getting the damage variance I was looking for, and the other part of damage variance as we head into the next dungeon, Kugane Castle, is direct hits. Direct hits are similar to critical hits in the sense that they increase the damage your ability deals. However, critical hits have a scaling amount of damage dealt based on the amount of stats that you have, whereas the direct hit stat only affects the amount of times, the percentage of which you deal direct hits. Direct hits otherwise deal a flat 25% damage boost on any ability that does end up inflicting a direct hit. So it's more important overall for optimization to get crits, but the thing about direct hits and crits is that they can stack. So the most ideal situation, which will never happen in normal gameplay, is that every single ability you ever use over the course of the speedrun direct hit crits. And you'll know something direct hit crits because the number that pops up after dealing damage will have a very big number pop up, and will also have 2 exclamation points beside it. And whenever something direct hit crits, it can usually, depending on the ability that direct hit crits, save you multiple GCs worth of damage. So right here I use Hyosho Ranryu. It does just a direct hit, which is still a good amount of extra damage. But if that had direct hit crit, I likely could have saved 2 to 3 GCDs on killing that boss. So there is a bit of RNG to damage optimization that is generally out of your hands, and because it's not always the same every single time, there is a level of adaptation to all dungeon speedrunning that you do have to take into account whenever you are going through it. Right here, I'm making sure to take out that summoner before anything else. If the summoner lives for too long, the summoner will summon an additional ad that I do not want to have to deal with. So we make sure to take him out. AoE optimization down on these 2 guys right here, using Baba Kakra, one of my other Ninki abilities, to quickly seal the deal on that one, which can let me talk about a certain facet of this that I haven't talked about, which is off global cooldowns. So off global cooldowns, or OGCDs, are abilities that you can use in between the cooldown of your regular GCDs. Sometimes you'll see me use an ability like Dream Within a Dream, or Mud, for example, to either add an additional effect between my GCDs, or you'll see me use it for the sake of... Train of thought derailed. You'll see me use it for the sake of activating an effect like Kasatsu. But generally speaking, most of my damage will be coming from GCDs. But right here, you'll see me use True North to negate my positionals, and then also use Trick Attack, which deals damage and also makes it so that the enemy that I target with Trick Attack takes 10% more damage for 15 seconds. And whenever I end up using an ability like Trick Attack or Mug that makes the enemy take more damage, I want to use as much of the burst that I have available under that effect. And that, in and of itself, is because all of those high damaging abilities can deal even more damage when they have those vulnerability ups, but it also multiplies the damage of a potential critical direct hit even further, to the point where, say, a normal critical direct hit without any sort of buffs would deal 100,000 damage, but with the buffs, it could deal 150,000 damage. And as I mentioned, every single GCD matters, so all that damage that I could potentially put out there, I absolutely, more than anything, have to make sure that it's being used as best as I possibly can. As I said, it's a lot to take in, it's a lot to memorize, a lot to think about in the moment, and you won't always make the correct decision. You might think that this was the right call, but it ends up costing you a GCD here. And while you're going through and adapting for everything to happening, you can never expect everything to happen perfectly every single time. Alright, so this is Yojimbo. I believe this was a Final Fantasy X summon that you could have that dealt more damage the more money that you gave to him. There's a similar mechanic to that in this fight, but right now I want to make sure that Yojimbo ends up dying before we go into the ad phase. Perfect. So killing Yojimbo before the ad phase was important because that skipped a very long, like 30 to 45 second ad phase that I could not skip in any way, shape, or form. So I saved my burst for that boss in order to take it out. My gear is low. I'll have to fix that in the middle of this, lest it actually break in the middle of my speedrun like it did in the last marathon. Don't let that happen, folks. Alright, so this is the Temple of the Fist. This is the one dungeon in the entire speedrun where if I play my cards wrong, I am actually completely at risk of dying. So the reason for that is because you can pull every single enemy that exists all the way over to the first boss's wall, which is this boss wall over here. The Moss Wall will summon additional adds based on its remaining HP. And once it goes down, there's technically access to the boss room available, but if you look off into the background in the distance here, the boss only spawns when all the enemies are dead. So we're going to go into it and quickly use our burst abilities to take this one boss down. The reason I say this one boss down is because an additional boss spawns whenever it reaches a certain time frame through the fight or when the first boss dies. So there's no way to skip the second one, but thankfully they don't have that much HP, so we can use all of our burst into the first one, and then the second one dies fairly quickly afterwards, even though we don't have a lot of our burst still remaining. Alright, the second section here doesn't have anything particularly major to worry about, so this is a good time for a quick message from the host.
Sounds good. Just to remind everybody, we are raising money for Point of Pride this weekend. Point of Pride is a trans-led 501c3 nonprofit organization. They've served tens of thousands of people in all 50 states and 100 plus countries by providing access to gender-affirming health and wellness services. The money that we raise this weekend will go to Point of Pride's various support programs, such as their HRT Access Fund, which is a scholarship-like program that provides 12 months of free medical care for trans folks seeking gender-affirming hormone replacement therapy via Point of Pride's telehealth partners. If you'd like to apply for one of Point of Pride's grants or garment programs, or if you'd like to get involved as a donor or volunteer, or just learn more about the organization, you can go visit pointofpride.org. And you can also use the charity command in chat. If you'd like to donate, use the donate command in chat, and again, you can donate as little as $1. Or as much as you are able to donate, again, for a fantastic cause. And you can put those donations to both a poll as well as a targeted incentive, an unlockable incentive. Right now we've got, I believe, still 3 polls running. But a very important announcement to make is we've just opened up a new incentive for our next bonus game, which is Banjo-Tooie, which will also be run by LordFluffy. So if you're enjoying this run, and especially if you're enjoying this commentary, which is just fantastic. I've been applauding over here with the mic muted. I'm going through all of these ability names and such, but if you're enjoying this run, Banjo is going to be run by LordFluffy as well. And that is a $500 incentive that needs to be met, and we're still about $334 short of our link to the past 80% bonus run as well.
Alrighty, so the final part of Temple of the Fist here, the only real major thing that we have to worry about is the final boss. Now, I don't believe it is particularly possible to do this, but I am going to go for it anyway. There is an HP threshold that this boss has that is around 50%. When the boss reaches this HP threshold, it will attempt to go into an ad phase. We can, if I play my cards right, deal a significant amount of burst damage and potentially skip that ad phase. But it's very difficult to do. So we're going to be doing a little bit of focus up here as I try and play this right. So once we get it to right about here, we're going to very specifically try and wait out for it to do an ability called Hurricane Kick. And now we're going to try and burst it down. Yes! Good job. Okay. Nicely done. So that is an entire ad phase that we end up skipping there via the use of that. So HP thresholds and making sure that you're bursting them down is super important for time saves in this when the HP thresholds are relevant. Because any and all ad phase that you do get are oftentimes anywhere from 30 to 40 seconds of total time loss. So I've never actually gotten that skip before because I've usually messed it up every time I've done it. So being able to actually get it in a marathon is incredibly exciting. All right. So this is the Drowned City of Scala. The Drowned City of Scala has a boss that has HP thresholds. And I say thresholds because it's multiple. And these HP thresholds are interesting in the sense that I ideally want to hit none of them. But if I do hit any of them, I want to hit the first one. I don't want to hit the second one and the third one. We'll get to why in a bit, but for now we'll focus on these enemies right here. So right now is a good time to talk about auto attacks. as the name implies, auto attacks are attacks that happen automatically whenever you are within range and targeting a specific enemy. Auto attacks do not deal too much damage on their own. However, auto attacks can be the difference between a GCD saved and a GCD lost when used incorrectly and incorrectly. The ideal situation is anytime I'm entering a mob of enemies, and there is one enemy that I know has more health than the rest of them, the ideal situation is to stay close to that enemy and target it with auto attacks. The reason for this is those auto attacks, while they don't deal a lot of damage on their own, they add up over time. And as I said, any and all GCDs that you save is up to 2.5 seconds of time saved as a whole. So right here, I dealt a bunch of damage to the stone bad before I dashed forward, and the reason for this is because I knew whenever it would finish up its attack, that it always does whenever it aggroes me for the first time, it would end up coming over into the Doton puddle that I put down around the time that the other enemies would be reaching 1 to 2 GCDs remaining worth of health. So that's a little bit of AoE optimization right there. And right here is going to be another case of auto attack optimization, but also positioning things correctly. Because these foe bads have incredibly large hitboxes, it can be hard to get them in a position where you're making sure that that the Doton puddle is hitting their hitboxes. So as a result, I'm currently trying to use my AoE, or my auto attacks rather. That was a missing. What? Oopsie daisies. I was trying to use my auto attacks there to take out one of them while the other two approached me, but didn't quite work out. So this boss here that has multiple HP thresholds. What I'm going to do is, because my optimization here is a little bit bad, I'm going to activate the first one on purpose around 70%. I've actually skipped it here, so I've messed up. The HP thresholds are specific numbers as a whole. And whenever the second and third HP thresholds are met, it will transform you into this little creature here called a Corpicur, and in order to make the boss targetable again, you have to take out all the additional adds here. So I don't want to hit this second one right here. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to sit through this hold one. The ideal situation, again, was to hit none of them. Wasn't really possible due to the cooldowns I had available, so I tried to hit the first one before bursting it down through the second and third. Because the first one doesn't turn you into a Corpicur, and it's much easier to take out the additional adds here. Now, I can't actually take out all these adds on my own before the boss finishes casting Order to Detonate. So all I can do is take out as many of them as I can in order to make sure I take as little damage as possible, which isn't a threat to me, but, you know, we make mistakes like that, and we simply move on with our lives, because mistakes happen, and we learn from them. Oh boy, though, do I have something to say about this part. So, prior to, I believe, patch 6.4 or 6.5, I don't remember exactly which one it was. The way that you would progress through this dungeon is whenever you would kill the adds here, a sigil would appear on the ground that would turn you into a floating mob that you could float across these gaps with. However, in patch 6.5, they altered this dungeon to make it doable with the NPC avatars' trusts. And as a result, they took away the little floaty guys. And I will never forget Square Enix for that. Because that was a cool little, funny little... I could turn into a cool little floaty dude. Why'd you have to do this to me? I don't get to float no more. It makes me sad. I'm crying. Alright, it's not that big of a deal, but it is something I definitely missed doing, because there was a funny little optimization that you used to be able to do with it, where you could actually right-click off the buff that turns you into the little funny floaty dude, and there's a little bit of optimization that came with that, of right-clicking it off like right as you got over the gap to make sure that you could get back your max movement speed as Ninja immediately, as well as have access to your dash abilities as soon as possible as well. But now it's just simply progression through that part is easier because of these bridges that come up, which is no big deal. Either way, hello, welcome to the final boss of the Drowned City of Scala. And there's nothing really particularly special about this guy. The only thing we have to worry about is there's one attack, I think, that can inflict like a blind on us, but I don't quite remember. It's been some time since I've even, I think, got to that point. As long as we burst it down fast enough, there should be no issue here. Making sure to use True North to get the highest damage possible on the abilities that have it. This is a proximity AoE. It deals more damage the closer you are to the center of it. Not going to care about it, as we can kill it before it's any sort of actual threat, and continue forward. Next up is Hell's Lid. So this is a dungeon that has a funny little thing at the start, where normally most of these dungeons will have a significant amount of mobs before the first wall, and then, have a significant amount of mobs before the second wall. This one here is interesting because there's only these 3 enemies here, and even though you can keep running forward, there is no other mobs for you to pick up here. So what I actually want to do here is try and optimize things here. Okay, perfect. Small little thing here. If you jump off a cliff and then use a dash ability, you'll automatically target down to the bottom of that cliff. Because the way that dashes work in 14 is they don't actually act as a dash or a teleport like their flavor text would tell you. They simply just move your character from one position to another. And the way that this game's spaghetti code works out, because of like 1.0 holdovers, is whenever you use a dash ability and you are in the air, it'll immediately teleport you to the ground because that's where the game is considering your position. It doesn't consider your y-axis, it only considers your x-axis. So, funny little thing you can do there, and it saves you a little bit of time in situations where you have to fall for a bit before you gain proper control. And if, fun fact, you use a dash that's on one side of the gap and try to dash to the other side of the gap, you'll just fall directly to the floor at the bottom of the other gap, which I don't think I can show off in this run, but there is a great, funny example of it in All Dungeons Heavensward in Pharaoh's Serious? Yeah, Pharaoh's Serious Hard. So that's a funny one. All right, second boss coming up has an HP threshold at 25%. That 25% will make it cast an ability called Whisper in the Wind. More than anything, I absolutely want to avoid Whisper in the Wind going off, because it is the single longest ad phase that I can theoretically avoid in the entire run. So Whisper in the Wind is extremely important to end up skipping as a whole. Meanwhile, we're just going to do a little bit of AoE optimization here. Something I haven't mentioned about the ninjutsu ability Bunshin is, while using Bunshin gives you access to the ability Phantom Kamaitachi, Bunshin itself has an effect of making any and all GCDs that you cast for the next 5 GCDs, as long as they are non-Mudra GCDs, deal an additional potency from a Shadow Clone. Bunshin optimization is mostly useful for AoE mobs, as it ends up having the most overall value when you use the Bunshin extra attacks on AoEs. But you won't always see me use it, because sometimes that little bit of extra damage will be useful, like right here, for example. Number 1, because I didn't have the cooldown available, but number 2, because it's going to be useful for helping me get past Whisper in the Wind. So I'm going to wait here for it to do an ability. Perfect. And even though it cast bar finishes, there was a small delay afterwards that allowed us to still be able to get it off, even though the cast bar finishes. So perfect. The longest ad phase in this has been skipped. Now we progress forward. So this final part here is a little bit tricky, because my optimization is going to be a little bit awkward. The first thing is the fact that these mobs have very wildly different sizes for their hitboxes, and some of them have slight ranged attacks while others are completely melee. So my ideal was to position it here in such a way that I'll just do one throwing dagger. Oh, the Doton ran out, so that's not work. I'm just going to use that there. All right, so here's where like the main problem comes into play. This is 2 enemies. As I mentioned, whenever you use Hollow Doton, Hollow Nozuchi makes your regular AoEs a gain on 2. But their hitboxes are so big that it's not possible for me to actually hit them with Katon because of the way the targeting of Katon works. So I actually want to optimize, optimally put the Doton in between the two of them, kill at least one of them before using the Mudra charge that I have on a single target rather than an AoE in that situation. All right, and this is Genbu, one of the 4 lords. Genbu does have an HP threshold. However, I have not in any way, shape, or form been managed to get myself past that HP threshold, no matter what I've tried. So we're simply just going to burst Genbu down extremely hard here to go into his ad phase as quickly as possible. Next up, we'll take out the gate, which only lasts a few GCDs. Once the gate is down, we can go entirely back to taking out the remainder of Genbu's HP. And once that's done, Hell's Lid will be done, and we'll be coming up on the late game versions of the dungeons at this point. Whew, that's a lot of talking. To answer the question, yes, I have the unrestricted party option available, which lets me go into these at maximum level, retaining all my abilities, items, gear, and other things in order to optimize my damage through this. All right, so this is the Fractal Continuum Hard. Fractal Continuum Hard has a couple very silly things about it in terms of managing your damage on Ninja that makes it a bit difficult. The first thing is coming up right here. So there's this Minotaur here that has a big hitbox. Normally, a single big hitbox is not that big of a deal, but the problem here is that we can spawn every single enemy in this part with area triggers, and the final spawn is 2 additional giant hitboxes. So this makes optimization here difficult. And the second part of it is the fact that the Chimera can cast one of 2 abilities, the Dragon's Voice or the Ram's Voice, one of which is an AoE that is a donut, so being underneath it is safe. The other one is you don't want to be underneath it because underneath it is unsafe. But the other part of it is the Minotaurs can constantly be casting cleaves, one that's all around them, one that's right in front of them. And anytime you get hit with a cleave, you get knocked back. So making sure that you don't get knocked back there is a lot of paying attention on top of trying to make sure that you're doing your damage correctly. It's a lot to focus on, and it can be pretty difficult to properly optimize it as a whole. So I don't end up using a whole lot of abilities there, just to save them all for this first boss, which has a mechanic which will force me to move like right there, because even if I stood there and took it, that the amount of lasers that it shoots me with deals a lot of damage. So very easy to avoid, but want to make sure it dies before it forces me to move when I don't want to. All right. Second section here, we're going to dash on over. So fairly normal through this second section, as we will be just taking out all the ads that spawn. Which gives me... There's something that I can explain that I've been doing, or haven't been doing. Right. So, you might have noticed that there's a few abilities on my hotbar that I haven't really used the entire time. These abilities are mostly defensive cooldowns. They're the cooldowns that make my survivability much easier overall. The reason I haven't been using them is because with the unrestricted party option, my maximum HP and defensive stats are so high on their own that these enemies don't deal any sort of legitimate threat to my health bar whatsoever. So defensive cooldowns are really only useful in the rare instances where you can actually take a threatening amount of damage. But for the most part, we're well beyond the point where Stormblood has to really worry about making sure... When running Stormblood, you have to worry about making sure you stay alive. Alright, so the second boss here is going to pull data from one of these 3 projections here of the Warring Triad, bosses you fought in this game, and also are references to Final Fantasy VI, the best Final Fantasy. Don't at me. The ideal situation is that it didn't pick Sophia. If that was the case, it did not pick Sophia, so we don't have to worry about the mechanic that comes from that. Burst it down, no issue. Head into the third section. Whew. This is a lot. You ever done solo commentary? That's a lot. All right. So this is another one of these chimeras.
I can give your voice a rest and do a pitch real quick if you need to catch a breather.
Yeah, would appreciate that.
Absolutely. As a reminder, everybody, you are watching Winter Pride 2023, run by Power Up with Pride. We're running from December 14th to December 17th, which means you've got until the end of tomorrow for this event, running about 18 hours each day. And we are benefiting Point of Pride for this event. If you'd like to learn more about the charity, you can find a link to their site in the panels underneath the stream, or you can use the charity command in chat. If you would like to donate, you can get the donation link with the donate command in chat. And please make sure to put your donations to both the different polls that we have available, as well as one of the target incentives. You could put your donation to 2 different incentives that way. Get twice as much bang for your buck that way. And all that money again is going to go towards Point of Pride. Right now, as far as unlockable incentives go, we are still only $666, exactly $666 into our $1,000 incentive for a Link to the Past any % bonus run later in the schedule. And if you're enjoying this run, we'd like to see more of LordFluffy and this fantastic commentary, absolutely fantastic commentary. LordFluffy also has a bonus game on the schedule, which would be Banjo-Tooie. It's a very different one, very different game, but it's still going to be excellent all the same. And that incentive is $500 away from being met. So if you'd like to see either of those things, make sure you use the donate command in chat and put your donation toward one of those 2 targets, as well as one of the polls or the bid wars that are available.
Alrighty. Final boss here has an HP threshold. However, that HP threshold is for it to just cast its Enrage ability. The Enrage ability will not come anywhere near close to finishing, as we deal more than enough damage to take it out long before the cast finishes. So, with that being said, the Fractal Continuum Hard is done. We're coming up on the end of the run here. We have 4 more dungeons ready to go. Next up is the Swallow's Compass. The Swallow's Compass has a very unique, for the Stormblood standard, start to the dungeon, as it has a somewhat non-linear form of progression, at least in the sense that your normal sense of progression is you're walking down the set path given to you. This is what you're doing here, but you are running in a circle before going down into the first boss room, which is somewhat non-linear, but still kind of linear. Anyway, the optimization here is going to come from dealing with these different Sai Taisuis. The different Sai Taisuis will do one of 2 different elements, or one of 3 different elements whenever you do them, always in a set order. And you want to optimize it based on the way that the ads spawn from the Sai Taisui's ringing the bell. In that particular case, I wanted to place a Doton where in between where all 3 ads spawned, but I forgot in the moment, so it didn't end up working out like that. For now, we're going to end up doing a thing here. Okay, end up getting most everything with that. Gonna try and put our AoE, our auto attacks towards this guy right here. Very good. Whew. All right, and for the final one here, there's no real, super important thing that we have to do. We just need to make sure the AoE these guys down. This tornado that spawns on me there is of no real consequence. Won't deal any relevant damage to me, does not inflict me with any crowd control effects, which is something I can go over. Although damage is not really a threat to you at all in this speedrun, certain boss abilities and certain AoE abilities from trash mobs can inflict certain debuffs to you, such as paralysis, which is something I've been hit with a couple times here. Paralysis as a debuff is something you really want to avoid, because every few seconds it has a chance to just outright stun you, much in the same way that when you get paralyzed in Pokemon, you have a chance to still attack, but there's also a good chance that you just get paralyzed and can't move outright. So making sure to avoid paralysis more than anything is the most important AoEs to avoid. This little thing with this boss is these orbs that are circling around, anytime I get hit by one, it'll lower my maximum HP. While that will still not put me in a position where I could theoretically die, you don't want to get hit by them and risk it anyway. So just standing right in the center of the arena will completely avoid any and all of the all the effects there. Through this section, anytime you're in these AoEs that spawn tidal waves, they will knock you back whenever you get hit by them. So the solution you have to deal with this is to place a Doton right about here, which will drag all the enemies into it that need to hit you. And now any and all knockbacks that appear will not knock you back very far, because you do get stopped by terrain whenever you get hit with a knockback or use a dash ability. Now, there's a small thing you can do with that, where if something is blocking your way, but in a few seconds it'll be out of your way, you can use a dash ability, and if you time it right, you'll actually instantly teleport to the location where the dash would take you, because of the way that the game, throughout the course of the entire dash, the game is trying to get you to that location. Ooh. That is the worst. So, hey, look at the top right of the screen there. You see all those debuffs? I just got hit with the AoE that comes from the mouth of one of these big old Morble guys over there. The Morbles inflict you what is commonly referred to as debuff soup. Never, ever, 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 ever get hit by those guys. You do not want to get hit by a Malboro. Ever. I forgot to remove the effect of Hive there. Alright. Hello, guy who definitely doesn't have the ringing in model of Sephiroth. How are you doing today? I have come once again to assault you with my abilities and cause you to disappear so that I can progress through this dungeon. Oh yeah, there's a big wind-up. So yeah, this is a good place to talk about the fact that most abilities in Final Fantasy XIV have some sort of like AoE marked telegraph. But sometimes, in order to avoid abilities, you have to actually look at the tell of the boss or enemy in question. So that boss is one of those cases where it has abilities that will deal damage to you if you're not paying attention to the tell, and the tell goes off without it. And learning to read tells will be important in normal gameplay of Final Fantasy XIV, especially when those situations come up. Now we get to ride a cloud. We're not foreshadowing anything by doing that. Alright, nothing really particularly to note about the final wave of enemies here. There's one little thing right at the end, there is something. But, yeah, as a whole, as I've said now multiple times, when you're doing these dungeon runs, every little bit of information that you should know is important, because if you know that, like, right here, the only enemy that has to die is a specific one, I'm not talking about this section here, but in certain dungeons, progressing through is not killing all of the enemies, but only killing specific enemies. So, if you know that only a specific enemy has to die to progress forward, prioritizing that is important. Or if you know, for example, that if you attack the Sai Taisui here and take it out, they changed that. That is not how that used to work. Prior, if you took out the Sai Taisui to a specific HP pool, these additional adds would spawn. However, it appears that they changed it so that it only requires you to take out 2 enemies there. Either that or I was misremembering. But regardless, hello everyone. Welcome to Sun Wukong. It might be a name that is not Sun Wukong, but it's Sun Wukong. Anyway, so this boss here has an HP threshold at 50%. I absolutely want to get the boss to 50% and then just leave it right there. And the reason for this is the boss has the Immortal status. The Immortal status, just like Xenos earlier, prevents the boss from dying before a specific event happens in the fight itself. So I'm not actually going to use any abilities here whatsoever, because none of the damage I deal in the current situation has any sort of relevance. Once Splitting Hairs happens, then I can actually start dealing damage. So Splitting Hairs causes these guys to split up. Oopsie daisies. I went to the wrong one. You want to make sure that you end up under the one that has that the rod ends up turning large here. I messed this up. Yeah, okay. Please don't go off. Okay, cool. Managed to make it off. If he did splitting hairs again, it would spawn another ad. You have to make sure that both ads die around the same time in order to finish. But once that happens, the boss is now considered dead. Dungeon is done, and you can move on. Next up is the Burn. The Burn is pretty much like the least visually appealing dungeon in the game, but there's a very good lore reason for it that I won't go into because spoilers. But it's just a bunch of sand. Just white sand. I don't like sand. Rough, coarse, and it gets everywhere. Alright, so right here, an additional ad will spawn with this mob of enemies when one enemy is remaining from the second bunch. So the ideal here is that... Oh wait, it's the next set that happens, right. Okay. So I wanted to save my abilities for that one. Sometimes because a lot of things end up bleeding together, the information isn't quite there. But in this second set, when this set of ads here is down to one of them remaining, an additional enemy will end up spawning. So we actually want to take out as many of these enemies as we can as fast as possible to force this next ad to spawn. That's effectively, you're minimizing GCDs like crazy by doing that. So now we head to this boss. Nothing really relevant here on this one at all. The ideal way that this was done in synced gameplay is that anytime a boss would use specific attacks, you'd want to use these little salt pillars on the ground to hide from those attacks to make sure that you aren't, eating more damage than you should. But the only real danger any of these attacks not being solved properly does is a vulnerability stack, which does increase the damage that I take, but again, you're not really in any sort of legitimate danger of dying unless you eat a significant amount of attacks just on your own. So no real reason to worry about avoiding any of the mechanics of that boss. The Charred Dreadnought for this set of ads right here is something we're going to focus down with our auto attacks because it has the most overall damage. There's also an additional ad that'll drag us to the center whenever it does a specific AoE. But as long as we position the Doton there correctly, it won't cause any positioning issues going forward with that. There's a bunch of Coblins here that'll lead to a big one. Ideally, I could have gotten an angle on the big charred Coblin there before it got around the corner so I can get a decent distance with the dash. Didn't end up happening, so now we're once again going to position our Doton, making sure that the drone is inside of it here. Now, just again, some more AoE optimization as we drop it down. And from the remainder of this dungeon, there's not a whole lot of important things to worry about. The only thing here is once you start the fight with the defective drone here, you're on a timer. Now, I've mentioned that HP thresholds will often lead you into an ad phase, but occasionally you run into a situation where the ad phase is not based on an HP threshold, but is instead based on a timer. So once you start this fight, you're on a timer to take out before that attack that just hit me, a theorochemical residue hits you, and then a couple seconds after that, it'll go into an ad phase where the boss becomes untargetable for a little bit. It doesn't lose a massive amount of time to hit that, but if you can beat the DPS check, you can end up saving that in the entirety of that time. So making sure to save some of your burst damage for that boss becomes fairly integral for making sure that you're not losing a significant amount of time through that particular section. As we're here, we're going to focus our auto attacks on the giant worm here. We're going to try and focus any and all of our targeted AoE abilities, however, on the smaller enemies. As I mentioned, sometimes the bosses and also the ads have bigger hitboxes than, your typical small hitbox. And whenever you use an ability that does AoE damage, but the AoE damage is based around a target, such as with these giant guys, If their hitboxes are too big, the AoEs might not actually be big enough to go from the center of that target's hitbox and hit additional enemies with their attacks. So, generally speaking, whenever you see me use something like Hellfrog Medium or Katon, I'll be targeting a smaller enemy that I know can make the AoE target hit all the enemies around it, versus hitting, so like in this particular case, hitting the Giga Worm Stalker instead of the actual Veiled Giga Worm makes it much, much easier for those AoEs to actually attack their targets. And that's the thing about AoE damage optimization that can be difficult to properly manage at first, but is important definitely in this run in certain situations to making sure you're dealing the most optimal damage you can. Hello, Miss Dragon. You were reworked a little bit this patch, which makes me a little bit sad because you were my favorite dungeon boss. Everyone died to you, and I thought that was funny. Goodbye, Miss Dragon. Alrighty. So, we're coming up on the final 2 dungeons of the run here. We have I don't know how to pronounce this. Like Saint Mocans? I've always said Saint Mocana and just done with it because everyone knows what I mean. But the Arboretum is the general name that everybody knows these dungeons by. And this has one particular gimmick right at the start, which is this Immaculate Appa. This Immaculate Appa I'm going to focus down with any and all of my auto attacks when I can. And this is because the Immaculate Appa actually has damage reduction on it. So I want all of my additional damage that I'm doing to go into the Appa to make sure it dies around the same time as the other enemies. Because if I don't, the Appa can actually live for multiple GCDs after every other enemy. After that, though, it's just a matter of spawning these muddy Corpicers, taking out the enemies with AoE optimization, and heading into the first boss. Whew, okay, this is a perfect time for some messages from the host.
All right. You are watching Winter Pride 2023, run by Power Up with Pride. If you'd like to know more about, we tried that whole sentence one more time. We're watching Winter Pride 23, run by Power Up with Pride. If you'd like to know more about the charity we're supporting, which is Point of Pride, you can use a charity command in chat or go to pointofpride.org. If you're just interested in learning more, staying up to date with future Power Up with Pride events, you can use the socials command in chat to get links to the Discord, as well as Blue Sky, the YouTube channel, co-host, and the Mastodon account, which is on kind.social. It's something that I have not plugged yet this run. Is anyone ready? Do we also do have merch? You can use the merch command in chat. I got a link to the merch page. The merch looks fantastic. And our very own Kitty has created some fantastic designs that is on the merch looks fantastic. There's t-shirts, tote bags, hoodies, all sorts of different things. And again, if you'd like to donate to the charity, you can do so through the Tiltify link on the donate command. And you can put those donations towards 2 different cents at the same time. You can choose to put it towards a bowl as well as a poll, as well as one of the targets. And we have 2 unlockable runs waiting to be met right now, one of which is a limited pass any % bonus run, and the other is a second bonus game, which would be Banjo Tooie, run by LordFluffy. So if you're enjoying this run, let's see more of LordFluffy's speed running prowess, I would donate towards Banjo Tooie to add more time to the event, see more speed runs, and give us a bigger opportunity to raise more money for charity.
Alrighty. So through the second section of the dungeon, there's an enemy here, this giant one that I'm targeting right now, that we absolutely want to, which I didn't that time because I was greeting for something that wasn't there. We absolutely want to avoid this roly-poly ability. Oh, it doesn't transform me back. It works differently than the other one that does this. Anyway, whenever you get hit by roly-poly, you get transformed into a Corpicer and you can't do anything. So I just have to sit here now. I am a sad cat. Anyway, it is possible to interrupt it with both interrupt abilities and stuns. So the ideal situation is because you have access to 1 stun on Ninja. The ideal situation is you let it cast the first one while you get all the enemies into position, and the second one you end up trying to take it out during that time. However, because I ended up messing that up, had to spend a lot of time as an unfortunate, unwilling corporate. I may have looked cute, and well, it's slow. I may have looked cute, but listen, I want to go fast as well, so I don't really vibe with it. Throwing daggers, why must you do so little damage? Why you gotta do it, man? Alrighty. So the final part of this dungeon, the first set of ads is nothing special, but the second set of ads has one thing I will be attempting to do that has, I want to say, a roughly like 50% chance of failure. But just like the beginning part of the dungeon, there are ads that have damage reduction, like this Muddy Amata right here. There is a thing you can do in the later part of this last set of ads here, is you can actually start up a fountain of water. And they are stinky. We don't need them to be stinky. So we're going to reset here. We're going to drag everything over here. We're going to dash, activate Shade Shift, which is an ability that gives me a shield, and if done right, perfect. Okay, we have enough time and health to activate this fan here, which cleans off the enemies in question, and it completely removes their damage reduction. And by removing their damage reduction, we can end up killing them GCDs faster than we would otherwise be able to do, saving time even though we have to take a little bit of time to turn on that water in the first place. Alright. Final boss here, the only relevant mechanic we have to worry about is there will be a certain time when attack will come from below the arena. We want to make sure we're standing not on the graded parts of the arena, but the solid design parts of the arena. This attack right here. If we're sitting on the graded parts of the arena, we'll be knocked up and be in an inactionable state for a little bit. And that's no good because it's slow. But other than that, you only have to worry about that once because of the amount of burst damage that you can deal. Dungeon down. And we're now on to the final dungeon of the run. And it is going to be our good friend, the Gimlet Dark. So, the Gimlet Dark used to have NPCs that would accompany you during this dungeon that is different from the Trust NPCs. And there used to be something you have to do with that, where you had to make sure this first set of enemies got aggroed to you, and not to the to the NPCs that spawned with you. Because the NPCs would get aggro, and then the enemies wouldn't chase you, and then by not chasing you, you'd end up losing time by having to go back and take out the enemies, because the NPCs don't actually deal a very large amount of damage on their own. But with the changes made to this dungeon, I believe in patch 6.5, was it 6.5? Probably. The NPCs were instead turned into the Trust avatars. Therefore, you no longer have to worry about those NPC avatars for the first part of this fight. So, thankfully, that means we can just deal with this with our normal AoE optimization and head on over to the first boss. So while we're heading to the first boss, just want to say that timing will end right at the end of the final boss. When the final boss dies, we are done. So, first boss here has no relevant mechanics to worry about. We just have to make sure that we take it down as fast as we possibly can. So a small little thing that I haven't mentioned, which is very seldomly relevant but important, is that accuracy in this game, your ability to hit enemies, is based on your level. So if you and the enemy you're fighting are the same level, you both have a 100% chance to hit each other. But if one unit has a higher level than the other, the accuracy of the accuracy of attacks subsequently changes. So there's a couple places where you can be interrupted in the action that you want to do by being auto-attacked by an enemy. And the ideal situation is you don't get anything hitting you actually whatsoever. Because we're level 90 and the enemies here are level 70, they have a decent chance to just outright miss me with their attacks. But if that doesn't happen in those situations, again, they seldomly come up. One of those situations is with the Fountain of Water I activated in the previous dungeon. One of those situations can pop up. It is definitely a little bit of an RNG thing to rely on that. But anyway, here, as I previously mentioned, sometimes these NPCs will grab aggro on these enemies. You do not want them to under any circumstance. Because then, rather than the NPCs chasing you down to fight the enemies with you, you'll have to run back and chase down the NPCs. Alright, so we want to take out the Scorpion here. As we take it out, we're going to be heading into the second boss. The second boss has both an HP threshold and a timer. When we reach a specific damage threshold of the boss, it will immediately go into an invulnerability phase. When it enters this invulnerability phase, it will dig into the ground, and then part of the wall will turn, heated like that. We just go to the side, and then we dodge the big laser that comes out. But basically, we don't want to actually use any of our burst abilities or our vulnerability increasing abilities, because of the fact that it will go into that extended vulnerability phase. The effects will long fall off before they become relevant. So you actually only want to use like small amounts of burst to get it to that HP threshold to make it go immediately, at which point you can then blow all of your burst into the enemy, and then you're good to go. So another case of wanting to making sure to grab aggro on all the enemies, bring them over to the second set of ads that spawn. As I mentioned, these NPCs don't really deal a whole lot of damage on their own, so you don't have to really worry too hard about them stealing aggro back from us. And the other thing with that is they don't take damage for us either, so they don't really serve any useful purpose in a speedrun setting. So as a result, we just take aggro from them and more or less ignore them this entire time, except for one little thing right here on the final set of enemies. So we make sure to attack this enemy here, which is guaranteed to do an AoE when it comes out of that wall. That allows us to progress. Then we come down here and help and take out the last little couple of enemies. So I'm specifically holding on to certain burst abilities at certain points to help out with killing certain these ads that spawn at certain times. Now, the reason for this is because the final boss is on a timer. Basically, the final boss has two phases. Both of these phases, when you reach a certain timer into that phase, the boss will gain the immortal status until the boss's immortal status will kick in super hardcore because it has to go through a scripted sequence of attacks. Once those scripted sequence of attacks are done, it will then allow you to progress to the next phase. And it is a 3-phase boss. Alright. So, that enemy died before the NPC was supposed to be able to take it out on its own. So now we head into the final boss. Again, timing will end when this boss finishes. So, we're going to quickly go ahead and aggro Anya here, specifically. And we're going to start blowing all of our damage into her immediately. We want to take her down to 0.1% HP as soon as we physically can. Alright, that should be quick enough. So when this attack goes off here, she should disappear immediately. Or not. There we go. Okay, so there was a little bit of... That's not like the attack that I was referring to, though. But these bosses, because they have the immortal status and only transition into the next phase when they're at 0.1%, anytime they go through a scripted sequence of attacks, they have to finish those attacks in order to be able to go to the next thing that they're supposed to do. Now, I did manage to avoid the big attack on the first phase, so let's see if I can avoid it on the second phase. This one is harder because I don't have access to as many burst abilities here, but there is a possibility that I can do this by saving my trick attack for this with some attacks. Doesn't look like I'll be able to do it though here. Yeah, all right, there you go. So had to be a little bit quicker on the draw, but this is just sort of how it goes. You can avoid one with the burst damage, but harder to avoid the second one. So this is a long scripted sequence of attacks where the enemy on the outside will throw AoEs at you, and then the other mob will do its specific like ultimate attack. I have to wait for the entire sequence to end, then it will disappear again. Go into another one of these cool little phases where, like, you know, they dash and bounce off of each other to deal attacks. And then we'll enter the final phase, which is an enrage phase, where I have to kill the enemies before they use their big old damaging attack that just outright kills me. Alright, so the way this is going to work is I've specifically saved up resources for this. I'm going to drop a Doton, pop a Bunshin, immediately going to hit one of them like that, and time. Alrighty. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all Dungeon Stormblood down and dusted. So not everything went perfect there, but I feel like being able to do solo commentary does take away your ability to play games a little bit, but overall that went really well. Yeah, that's a sub 130 on my end, which is extremely good considering the circumstances. Alrighty. Well, with that being said, I know we're a bit behind schedule, so I'm just going to go ahead and get my shilling out of the way and let you all continue with the schedule. If you enjoyed that run, I have another run coming up. It is the Banjo-Tooie run. It is one of our bonus games. Please make sure to donate for that. Donate for the Link to the Past any % run. I'll also be on the commentary for the Link to the Past run later today. If you want to find me, you can find me at twitch.tv/LordFluffy. You can find me on Twitter at LordFluffyX, on Blue Sky at LordFluffy. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed that run. Final Fantasy XIV is a lot of fun. If you've been struggling to enjoy the game lately for various reasons, I definitely recommend giving dungeon speedrunning a try. You can do all the dungeons together with the all dungeon speedrun itself, or you could just do individual dungeons. There's so many different ways to speedrun Final Fantasy XIV. You have deep dungeons like Eureka Orthos. You have all the trials. You can speedrun the 24-mans just by, like, you know, going into them with a party of people. You can do dungeon speedruns synced with a group of people. You can do co-op speedruns unsynced. You can do A Realm Reborn, Heavensward. You can do Shadowbringers if you want. There's dungeons, there's ways to speedrun this game all over. So if you love this game and want a new way to love it, 100% recommend giving that a go. But with that being said, I'm going to go say goodbye, everybody. So, hope you all enjoyed that. My name is LordFluffy, and I'll see you all another time.
Thanks so much, LordFluffy, for that fantastic run. You are watching Wonder Pride 2023, benefiting Point of Pride. If you'd like to donate to the charity, you can use the donate command in chat. If you'd like to see the upcoming schedule, you can use schedule command in chat. Coming up next is going to be Hime's Quest with Asuka 424. So as we are getting that set up, to remind everybody a little bit about the incentives that are coming up. I know LordFluffy just did, but talk a little bit more about the incentives and polls that you can donate towards as well. As well as remind everybody, you can see the merch now. Now you can see on the intermission screen scrolling through the different merch that's available under the merch command. Some of that merch is available from Point of Pride itself, and some of that merch has also been designed by Scala Kitty. All of it really does look fantastic. So if you'd like to support the charity and get yourself some cool stuff to wear, or a tote bag or a hoodie, something like that for yourself, you can do that as well. If you do decide to donate through the Tiltify link, you can donate from as little as $1 to as much as you're able to donate, and you can put those donations towards 2 different incentives at the same time. You can put it towards one of the different polls as well as one of the different targets. The different polls that are available right now include a file name bid war for the Link Between Worlds randomizer run. And right now, Lonk is in the lead by quite a bit there. So if you'd like either Lunk or Saku to take over the lead, you do have a little bit of work to do there as far as getting donations in for that bid war. The Chameleon Twist character choice bid war is also available. as well as picking bonus flags for the Sticky Business run. And for that particular poll, the top 3 are going to be used. And again, as Lord Fluffy had said, there are 2 different runs that we are trying to unlock to add more bonus content to the run. One of which is a link to the past 80% bonus run, which is about $350 short of being met right now. And then during that last one, we also opened up the incentive for bonus game number 2, which is Banjo-Tooie. And that is a $500 incentive to be met. So if you'd like to add more content to run, see more speed runs, and give us a bigger chance, a longer chance to donate towards charity and raise money for Point of Pride, put your donations to support not just the Bid Wars, but towards the targets as well. And as you're going through the Tiltify donation process, you can do both of those at the same time. Again, the next one's going to be Hami's Quest with Oscar424. So stay tuned.